Hey, what's up, guys? It's Timothy here. I haven't really looked at a lot of the Aether Revolt spoilers up to this point, but we're gonna go ahead and look through them. And honestly, the masterpieces, if you haven't seen them by now, you should check them out. But I'm not really gonna go over the masterpieces here because I want to do this from a limited perspective. And talking about masterpieces doesn't really help you. Yeah, a lot of them are fantastic and limited. Some of them are broken, some of them will win you the game, but you can't really expect to play with or against them throughout, the course of limited format. So I'm not really going to evaluate that. What I am going to look at is the two masterpieces that are actually cards from Aether Revolt, and I'm going to look at all of the spoilers that came out today. Today is Monday, the 3rd of January. I'm sorry, the 2nd of January, but I'm recording this at midnight, so I've got everything up to the 3rd of January at midnight, and there's a lot. Keep in mind, pre-release is a week from this coming up weekend, so Wizards held off a week. They decided to wait till after winter vacation to start doing spoilers, so I imagine we'll have a full spoiler by the end of this week, but we've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to start with the two masterpieces. Keep in mind, even though there are masterpieces, these are cards from the set, and I'm assuming they're both mythics. I'm not entirely sure, but I think they both are. Anyway, Paradox Engine is the first card here. 5 mana for a legendary artifact that says, whenever you cast a spell, untap all non-land permanents you control. This has EDH written all over it, and while I don't, my first reaction was you would never play this in Limited, and honestly, a lot of times you won't. But I could see a deck that has a lot of instants in it and really good creatures that would want to use this to ambush your opponent's creatures in combat. Basically, essentially giving them like instant speed, vigilance, or something along those lines. But overall, this card is not what you want in most limited decks. Think about the card Dramatic, Dramatic Reversal, the one in a blue that untaps all of your non-land permanents at instant speed. That you never play that. There's no reason to play it. And Paradox Engine, really, you're not comboing in limited with this card unless there's something that does that. But the fact that you need to keep a steady stream of spells going and stuff like that leads me to believe you don't want this card. The exception would be if there are a lot of things that tap to draw cards. Then I could see something going on there. For instance, there is the blue Quicksmith rare that lets you give an artifact the ability to tap and draw cards. But even then, I could see just cutting this from the deck. So Paradox Engine, not a card you want in Limited unless you're trying to be really, really cute. The same kind of goes for Planar Bridge. Oh, look at that. There's actually, I'll go back and click the other one. So Planar Bridge is 6 mana for a mythic legendary artifact, 8 mana to tap and search your library for a permanent, put it on the battlefield and shuffle your library. I'm not going to talk about this in Commander because obviously it will see Commander play. It goes and gets your Omniscience. There's no reason really to talk about it in Standard, even though I could see potential for this in sideboards in Standard. But in Limited, I'm a little on the fence about this because, again, just like Paradox Engine, my initial reaction here was this costs too much mana, don't play it. And that really depends on the format. Like, if this were a card from Battle for Zendikar, Oath of the Gatewatch, I could see it being, like, moderately played in Limited. But in Kaladesh, with Aether Revolt coming out, if Aether Revolt has any inkling of the aggro and like the extreme aggro decks that Triple Kaladesh has, you'll never play this card. There's no reason to. Think about it. You're paying 14 mana to fetch a permanent from your deck, which probably costs less than 14. And the real appeal here is that you get to do it every turn. But if you're paying 8 mana to fetch things that don't cost 8 mana, like, I don't see this winning you the game. And if you have those cards in your deck and you have a way to get to that mana, like, you should be winning the game with those cards, not something to go fetch them out. Yes, this does some pretty cool stuff. I'm sure there are tons of combos with it, but the cost is too restrictive. This is kind of a shameless plug here. I'm intending to do a rating for every card in the set before the set is released for pre-release. Just a little heads up, this is like a 1 or 2 out of 10 for me. I do not think the potential for how powerful it is justifies the amount of mana you're spending on it. And the only time I would see this is if my opponent is playing the dirtiest, slowest deck on Earth. If they're playing a Planar Bridge deck, I'll board my Planar Bridge in. But I'm not seeing it here. So prove me wrong. I don't know. Somebody please break this in Limited. Remember, we're talking about Limited. Let's not get into Commander with that card. Moving away from masterpieces, this guy was spoiled late last night. Peacekeeper Colossus, and I'm going off the Mythic Spoiler translation here, is a 3 mana 6/6 vehicle. It has the crew cost is 4, so crew 4 turns it into a 6/6 creature for the turn. And then for 1 and a white, another target vehicle you control becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So this, and we'll see another card here in a second, they're trying to make white-red a more defined vehicle archetype. Obviously, you can play vehicles in any deck. You would probably play this in a lot of decks, even though crew 4 for a 6/6 is not what you want. But if you have a lot of vehicles, this lets you kind of get around that whole prohibitive crew cost thing. So cards like this, if you have them in your deck and you're able to build around them, might make some of those really, really powerful but really slow vehicles more playable. I'm thinking cards like Aether Express, Demolition Stomper. Paying 2 mana to turn it into a creature is way different than tapping 4 power or 5 power worth of creatures. So this is a build around if there is one at all. And you'll see that there's kind of like a more defined vehicle archetype, and it's pushing towards red-white, which in Kaladesh, red-white was the vehicle archetype, but there weren't really a lot of cards that solidified that in the color, and you would just play vehicles in every color, so it's very rare that you came together with a red-white deck that wanted you to have a bunch of vehicles. So the other thing to note here is that you can activate that ability regardless of whether or not this is a creature. So this guy has a little bit of utility even when it's not doing anything as a creature, and it can't target itself, so keep that in mind. But pretty interesting card there, and 6/6 is pretty strong, but you want to be using that ability. Crew 4 for a 6/6 is not what you want here. Moving on, and again, there's going to be a bunch of them, and we're going to start out with a bang. This card is really cool, and I don't know what to think of it yet. Kind of piggybacking off of what we just said with the last guy. Consulate Dreadnought, 1 mana for a 7/11 crew 6 vehicle, and that's it. It's an uncommon too. This isn't a rare. So this is again like build around uncommon. This pairs really well with the card you had before it. Obviously, you could play this on turn 1 and maybe curve out really nicely with creatures to the point where you can start attacking with this on, I don't know, maybe turn 4 or something like that, and then it's just slamming in there. But you really got to hit on curve. Not to mention, if you draw this a little later in the game, you know, it's a little bit weaker, but still 7/11 is going to get in there. Crew 6 is way too much. That's why Demolition Stomper is a nearly unplayable card. That's why Aether Express is pretty bad, except in certain matchups. But this kind of fits the same category, right? The difference here is that the initial mana cost, the investment, wasn't a lot. When you play Demolition Stomper and it doesn't do anything, you wasted 5 mana. When you play this and it doesn't do anything, you used 1 mana, right? So what you really want to be doing is comboing this with cards like the Peacekeeper that we just saw, and the card we'll see here in a minute. Overall, if you don't have those cards, this is not exciting me. If you do have those cards, I mean, that's pushed, right? 7/11 is just pushed, but it's really cool. It's just huge stats, right? Foundry Assembler is 5 mana for a 3/3 with Improvise, and keep in mind it's an assembly worker. That's pretty important here. Improvise is basically Convoke with artifacts. I mentioned this. We've seen one other Improvise card before today. It lets you tap artifacts to reduce the cost of the card. So you could essentially cast this for free by tapping 5 artifacts, or you know, even if you tap 2 artifacts, it's a 3/3 for 3 and colorless. If you're ever paying more than 3, if you're paying like 4 mana for a 3/3, then you're reaching the territory where you don't really want this. So in a dedicated artifact deck, this is okay. In a almost completely all artifacts deck, this is pretty good. And in a deck where you just kind of have artifacts here and there, this is pretty bad. The extra note here that a lot of people probably already caught on is that you can actually fetch this up with Self-Assembler. But keep in mind, the draft format will be 2 Aether Revolt, 1 Kaladesh, so getting those self-assemblers isn't really what you're going to be looking for here. And honestly, if I haven't mentioned it on camera before, I don't like self-assembler as a card, so that's just my opinion. This is a just standard okay card. It's very similar to I believe it was Magic M15 that had a 6 mana Convoke artifact, but it was a 4/4. Very similar, but keep in mind Improvise only lets you tap artifacts, so you can use your servos, you can use your vehicles, so on and so forth. Gives value to them. Moving on, we have Wetwork Brawler. This is 3 and a red for a 3/3 human Artificer. Keep in mind Artificer is probably still relevant here, especially with that Kaladesh pack. And it's just a 3/3 menace. Now, if you're paying this for 4, you could do worse. for a common, a 3/3 Menace is still a decent playable card in red if you want to continue beating down and so on and so forth. If you ever reduce this by at least 1, it becomes a very good card. A 3/3 Menace for 3 is fantastic. So, and it shouldn't be that hard in red, which is still an artifact-based color here. You should have an artifact down by turn 2, 1 or 2, and then curve into this nicely on turn 3. And even in the late game, if you're able to turn your artifact into a 1-mana 3/3 Menace, that's pretty good. Keep in mind, Improvise is a little tricky. You have to tap down artifacts. So on your turn, you're leaving yourself a little vulnerable. Not too dissimilar from Crew in a Vehicle if your artifacts are all creatures, but hopefully you can use your little, I don't know what you want to call them, your value artifacts on the side to help you with this. Things like equipment you can use to reduce costs with Improvise. So pretty neat interaction there. Also on that note, I will point out now before I move on to the next card that Fabricate doesn't look like it's making a comeback here. I called this Fabricate is not coming back. I guess their approach to Kaladesh was they wanted you to feel like an inventor, and now the approach here is that we have kind of this war going on for Aether, so it makes sense that Fabricate's not really here because people aren't inventing anything. They're rebelling, right? Moving on, we have Shipwreck Moray, 3 and a blue for a 0/5 fish. When it enters the battlefield, you get 4 energy, and you may pay an energy to give it +2/-2 until end of turn. So on its surface, this blocks and attacks as a 3/3, I think, most of the time. Your opponent has to keep in mind that if they don't block it, you can make this a 5/1, which leaves it more vulnerable, but also pounds in for damage, right? And then on blocks, this does a decent job blocking on its own, and then also has the ability to just kind of trade around and kind of brick wall your opponent if they can't get past a 3/3 or an 0/5. So I like the flexibility on this card. This type of card is really hit or miss for me when it's more of a defensive card than it is an attacking card. I'm thinking something like Water Courser, or a good example was the Scab from Eldritch Moon, that could adjust its own power and toughness, had prowess or something like that. Those cards are much better when they're aggressively aligned than when they're defensively aligned, but I could see this guy doing a little bit of work. I'm not excited about it, and 4 energy is quite a bit off one thing, so it's not asking you to do much. Moving on to Silk Weaver Elite. This is a 2 and a green 2/2 with reach, and it has a new ability keyword here, Revolt. When Silk Weaver Elite enters the battlefield, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, draw a card. So Revolt is basically a mechanic that gives you some sort of bonus off of cards if you've had a permanent leave the battlefield this turn. In Limited, that's not hard to do. We've seen a lot of blink effects already and things like that from Kaladesh, and this includes a lot of other things too. If you sacrifice something, you are fulfilling Revolt requirement. If something died in combat or something just dies, period, your opponent uses a removal spell or something that triggers it, so on and so forth, right? Something as simple as Kraken and Evolving Wilds. And I've heard a lot of people mention already with a card we'll see here in a bit that, like in other formats, Kraken of Fetch Land fills the Revolt requirement. It doesn't have to be a creature that leaves the battlefield, it just has to be a permanent, even if it's just blinking out and in. So Revolt, not too hard to trigger. It reminds me a little bit, or at least I think it'll play out a little bit like Raid from Cons. Sometimes you would be forced to make really weird attacks, and your opponent would kind of like look at you like, what are you doing? In order to fulfill a raid requirement, which required you to have already attacked with a creature that turn. I can see the same thing happening here. So if your opponent's making really weird attacks into creatures that could easily kill them, be wary of Revolt. They may just want one of their cards to leave the battlefield through combat in order to get this extra bonus. And it also incentivizes you to trade your creatures. Like you play a 2/2 on turn 2, you slam it into your opponent's 2/2 on turn 3, they block and trade, you get to play this and draw a card. As for the card itself, it's decent. If you are getting that card off of it, it's a really good card. And keep in mind it has reach too. But if you're not getting that card, I'm not sold on it. So I don't know that there's going to be a Revolt deck, but there will be, and that's my Facebook, guys. There will be a pretty decent set of cards where Revolt will be pretty good, I think. Moving along with that, sorry, I hit the back button too many times, I guess. Night Market Aeronaut, I should say, is 3 and a black for a 2/2 with flying. It's an Aetherborn warrior. It's common, and it has Revolt as well. It enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter if a permanent left the battlefield this turn, or if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. So it has the potential to be a 3/3 flyer if Revolt is filled, and on its base it's a 2/2 flyer for 4. I don't like this card. I don't think it's very good. Even the upside of it being a 3/3 flyer seems okay. Keep in mind that green-black 1/1 counter theme is probably still going to carry over into Aether Revolt a little bit, so if 1/1 counters are relevant to your deck, maybe this goes up in value, but the ceiling here is still not that high. A 3/3 flyer for 4 is a good card, and is maybe what black needs, but again, this card really needs a less aggressive format in order to shine. Think about, I forget the name, Weldfast something from Kaladesh. It was a 4-mana 3/3 blue creature that gained flying whenever an artifact entered the battlefield. This isn't too far off, and that card was almost unplayable, not very good. With a hill giant being kind of a low downside. This one, the floor is actually pretty low. A 2/2 flyer for 4 is not very good, like a bad Windrake even. But the upside is, you get a Phantom monster, which is pretty good. So I don't know. This one's a little hit or miss, but I'm leaning on the side of I don't like it very much. Decommission. 2/0 white, another Revolt card. It is an instant that just destroys an artifact or enchantment. The Revolt condition, if you had a permanent leave the battlefield that turn, you gain 3 life. So basically mimicking Appetite for the Unnatural here. And I think I like this a little bit more than Fragmentize. Some people are a lot divided on whether or not Fragmentize and Appetite are main deckable cards. Whatever you feel about those, I would feel the same about Decommission, and I'd be very happy having Decommission. What I want out of my Naturalize effect is to be kind of cheap. 3 is kind of the limit I go on that, so Creep and Mold, Demolish are cards that are kind of off my radar unless I really need them, and B, I want them to be instants, and this one is an instant. The extra life gain is pretty nice, but I would still play this or take this for the sideboard. Just because of, its utility in a set like this. And it is looking like Aether Revolt will be even, notching up how important artifacts are from what Kaladesh was. Yeah, Kaladesh had a lot of artifacts, but it wasn't really an artifact matter set. Whereas this one, with cards like Improvise and all the vehicles and stuff like that, this is what I would consider an artifact set. I don't know. You might disagree with that. Horror of Invention. Sorry, let me try that again. Horror of Invention is X and triple blue for an instant rare with Improvise. So that X cost lowers by 1 for each artifact you tap. Keep in mind you're also paying mana for this. You get to search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost X or less, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So it tutors for an artifact card mana cost X or less. I'm very skeptical about this sort of card in Limited because it's going to cost quite a bit. Think about it. If you want to search up a 3-drop, you need to pay either some combination of 6 mana or 3 mana and tap 3 artifacts, something like that. You already have to have a decent number of artifacts in order to fetch up something really, really great with this. 3 mana will get you a 0 mana artifact, but you need to be all in on artifacts to make this card very, very good. And I could see it being like at least a little bit playable. Obviously, this is a shoe-in for every artifact commander deck ever made and ever to be made that includes blue. But in Limited, this is the type of card I'm going to have a little bit of trouble evaluating. It is an instant too, which is interesting because you would think a tutor like this would be sorcery. And it does put the card you search up on the battlefield. But overall, I'm going to have trouble evaluating this card until I see it in action. My gut instinct is that it's a little bit on the slow side, and I don't think it's very good. But we'll see. If there are decks that are almost completely artifacts and Improvise is just that much easier to pull off, then I could see it doing some work. My opinion, though, paying 3 mana and tapping down some artifacts to go search for like a 2 or 3 drop doesn't seem that good. From a rare when we've already seen like Trophy Mage, which goes and fetches a 3-mana artifact on top of a body. So we'll see. SRAM, I hope I'm saying that right. SRAM's expertise is 2 and double white for a sorcery, a rare sorcery. Create 3/1/1 servo artifact creature tokens. You may cast a card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. Now this is very good. Obviously very close to Yahini's expertise, which was essentially a black version of this, right? This little theme of 3 going on here. In fact, It's right underneath here. All creatures get -3/-3, and then you have that same second part. Again, I'm not going to speculate on standard. This obviously has implications there. But in limited, this is a good card. You know, 4 mana, a 4 mana 3/3 is already a fine card. That's a hill giant. Spreading that damage out, I think, is a little bit better. So making servos is better. Making artifacts is better in this set. Think about this is essentially adding 3 mana for improvise. And then you also get to cast an additional free card on top of it if you have a card with converted mana cost 3 or less in your hand. So this does a lot, and this is a first pickable rare, no doubt in my mind. This wants me to be white. This wants me to do some sort of artifact-based shenanigans, and it's just a lot of value. If you cast a 3-drop, and I said the same thing about Yahini's Expertise, if you cast a 3-drop with this, you're paying 4 mana for 7 mana's worth of cards, which is very good rate. Even if you drop like a 1 mana spell, you know, you paid 4 mana for 4, you know, a total of 5 mana worth of cards. So you're only plussing on the amount of mana that you're essentially paying, as opposed to how much you're actually putting into the card. And I don't know if that made sense or not, but you understand what I meant, right? Moving on, let's find out who SRAM is. SRAM is a SRAM Senior Edificer, is a 1-in-white 2/2 legendary dwarf advisor. It is a rare, and it says whenever you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, draw a card. And I love this card. It's fantastic. It is a legendary, so I don't know, Commander, if you're into that sort of thing. It is probably very close to pushing the artifact theme in standard. Keep in mind, we have like so many tools for an artifact deck in standard with Sigarda's Aid and Stitcher's Graft, and you know, there are a bunch of them that I'm kind of blanking on them right now, but you know, that the equipment theme is so close to being an aggressive playable deck, like a tier deck. Maybe this is what they need to push it over the top, because it's a cast trigger. You cast an equipment, you draw a card. You cast a 0 mana Bonesaw, you draw a card, and you have an equipment on board for whatever you need it for. So pretty crazy stuff. Works with vehicles too. You cast a vehicle, you draw a card, and that helps to mitigate the riskiness of vehicles, right? Part of the problem with vehicles, why you don't want a lot in the deck, is if you don't have the creatures to back them up, they don't do anything. Which is, I like the card Bomat Bizarre Barge because it replaces itself. Well, SRAM essentially replaces all your vehicles so that you're getting a little bit of value if it's not quite popping off the way you intended. And then also with auras, there weren't a lot of auras in Kaladesh, and so far we haven't seen too many in this set, but that's just an added bonus, right? You're really looking at vehicles here, and equipment and auras are kind of a bonus, but it helps to mitigate the problem with auras too, which is if your creature with an aura gets removed either in response or after the aura becomes attached, then you just your opponent 2-for-1'd you, and you let that happen by playing an aura. But if that aura already cantripped, seems pretty good. So I like SRAM. I like it a lot, and I'm interested. I think this is a fairly high pick, and it's the type of card that incentivizes you to go that vehicle route again. Not to mention maybe pick up a straight aura or equipment if there are any really playable good ones in the set. Moving on, Fatal Push. This is a fantastic card. No doubt about this one here. Fatal Push is 1 black. That's the kicker there. No pun intended. 1 black for an instant uncommon. Destroy target creature if its converted mana cost is 2 or less. Revolt. Destroy that creature if its converted mana cost is 4 or less. Instead, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. So a lot of people talking about that this is in Modern. Will it replace Terminate? I don't know. I don't play a lot of Modern. I'm not the person to talk about that. Is this card good in Limited? Yes, absolutely. So assuming you don't draw this super light, and assuming you're not relying on this as the only removal in your deck, this card's fantastic, and it shouldn't be too hard to pull off that revolt clause there. Keep in mind, this is a 1 mana spell no matter which mode you're going for, and the fact that it kills something early and also has the potential to kill something in the mid game and possibly even late game, to me seems like an incredible card. And like this, to me, screams the type of card that I would first pick out of a pack with a bad rare. So I've got my eye on this. It'll probably get a very high rating from me when I do start rating the cards, but I am impressed by it. I think its potential to deal with something early and deal with something even better a little bit late is good. Keep in mind, I said that you can't rely on this as like your only removal. You still need something to deal with those 5 and 6 drops, and if you're relying on this to do it, it doesn't matter whether you can fulfill Revolt or not. This does have limitation to it, but it's very, very good. And I'm surprised that it only costs 1 black, and it's an instant. Like, everything you want in a removal spell, right? Moving along. We're getting there, guys. There are a lot here, and I imagine there will be a lot of cool stuff, though. I'm really impressed with the design here on some of these cards. Gonti's Aether Heart, 6 mana legendary artifact, mythic rare. When Gonti's Aether Heart or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you get 2 energy. You may pay 8 energy, exile Aether Heart, take an extra turn after this one. Now, this is my first time actually seeing this card. I'm going to be honest, somebody read this to me earlier. They missed that part about exiling Gonti's Aether Heart. They said pay 8 energy, take an extra turn, and that's what I thought it was. And I was like, wow, that's insane. No, it's a one-time thing, right? And I was about to mention Ugin's Nexus, kind of the same thing. It's a one-trick pony. You take an extra turn for this kind of thing, but this seems good in pretty much any format that you can break standard in, right? But that didn't make any sense, but you know what I meant. Any format that you can break this card in seems like a good place for it. 8 energy, not too hard when you're already getting 2 for playing this, and then an additional 2 for every artifact that comes in. And then on top of that, you're getting another 2, well, yeah, 2 for playing this, 2 for any artifact that comes in, and whatever energy you already have stored up before playing this. I will mention something here, and I don't want to mention standard too much because I want to talk about the cards in limited, but I'm playing a Whirler Virtuoso combo deck, which requires like some combination of decoction modules and Panharmonicons, and you need 3 of those to go off. Gonti's Aether Heart lets you go off with just this and 1 other card, Decoction Module or Panharmonicon, because every Thopter that comes in will give you 2 off this plus 1 off Module or another 2 off Panharmonicon. So a 2-card combo there instead of 3. Interesting to think about. Maybe I'll post my Whirler Virtuoso deck online for you guys to see, because I think it's pretty interesting, and you probably heard about it before. If you haven't, it's a blast. But back to the card, right? Gonti's Aether Heart in limited, I think, is a very playable card. It's the type of card that I think you'd be happy to see first pick, but remember, taking extra turns can be a little overrated. Taking an extra turn sometimes just turns into drawing a card. So you want to be kind of beaten down, and you can really take advantage of this to destroy your opponent if you're an aggressive deck, an aggressive artifact-based deck. Keep in mind, you just have a couple artifacts in your deck, you don't want to play this card. But if you are, maybe half artifacts, half beatdown, this is a very good card. Even in controlling decks, this can be decent to take an extra turn, but you want that turn to matter. So keep that in mind. But really interesting card. We're not going to talk about Brea. We're not going to talk about Duretti. We're just going to move on with our life. Again, another really interesting card here. Green Belt Rampager. 1 green for a 3/4 rare elephant. When it enters the battlefield, pay 2 energy. If you can't, return it to your owner, to its owner's hand, and you get 1 energy. So, first off, this is not a completely abusable like energy sink. You can't get, it doesn't equate to tap 1 green, get 1 energy, because that first part about paying 2 energy is not optional. If you have 2 energy, you are required to pay that to keep this on the battlefield. So it's not like you can just spam this with green mana to get a ton of energy. Obviously, you can get up to 2. If you play this on turn 1, you get 2 energy. Or you get 1 energy. If you pay this on turn 2, you get a 2nd energy, and then you can drop it again. Like, this is a 3/4 on turn 2 at the very worst, right? Not to mention you can do like Aether, the Searcher deck for a basic, put in your hand. I can't think of the name right now, but you get 2 energy off that, and then you play this on turn 2, right? A 2-mana 3/4 off of itself and a 2-mana 3/4 off of other cards is very good in my opinion. Not to mention, it's just a way to kind of always make sure you have access to energy. It's essentially 2 green mana, get 2 energy, if that's what it boils down to. But it's a little tricky because that first part is not optional. You have to do that if possible. Really, really aggressive card, though. Turn 2, 3/4 is going to be hard to beat a lot of times. And probably a shoe-in for these green-red based aggro decks that are playing like Voltaic Brawler and stuff like that. Very similarly, we have Green Wheel Liberator, and this is my first time noticing this is actually rare. It's a 1 in a green for a 2/1 with Revolt. It is an Elf Warrior, and it enters the battlefield with 2 1/1 counters on it if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. So it'd be a little tricky to play this on turn 1. Play this on turn 2 and get it to be a 4/3, but shouldn't be too hard to do that on turn 3. You just crack an Evolving Wilds or something like that, and then suddenly you have access to a 4/3 on turn 3. In my opinion, not as strong as the Elephant, because the Elephant can guaranteed come down on turn 2 if you have at least 2 green mana open. This one's a little trickier, requires a little bit more work to do, and is a little bit less flexible overall. I'd rather have a 3/4 than a 4/3, right? But they seem like they would go in similar decks. In Limited, very strong card. A 3 mana 4/3 is pretty impressive, even though in Limited it's going to be a little bit harder to pull this off and get it to come down at a point in the game where it's still relevant enough to deal as much damage as it can possibly deal. So be careful. Be on the lookout for 1 mana cards that can come down and also leave the battlefield so that this does something on turn 2. I'm sure there will be a couple of those in the set, and I'm blanking on anything in Standard right now, but keep this card in mind. I think it is a very strong card. Moving along, we're probably more than halfway. This is going to be a long video, so if you're still watching, thank you. Metallic Mimic. 2 mana for a 2/1 rare shapeshifter artifact creature. When it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Metallic Mimic is the chosen type in addition to its other types. Each other creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it, additional 1/1 counter. So this fits in pretty much every deck. You would play this as just a 2 mana 2/1, even if you have to name something random like Human or Artificer or something like that, because there is a chance it'll have the extra bonus. You don't really build tribal decks in this, like you don't build the Dwarf deck very often, or you don't build a Vidalcan deck or anything like that, or a Shadowborn, or what are they called? Aetherborn deck or something like that. But this is the type of card that you pick up early, and then you start actually kind of making decisions based on creature type, which is relevant. So sweet card, very similar to Adaptive Automaton down here. Very nice for tribal EDH players. Overall, a decent card, and at the very worst, a bear, which is usually a playable card. Even though bears were a lot worse, 2/1s are not particularly great if you're not getting any extra value off of them. All right, moving along. Aeronaut Admiral looks to be piloting a smuggler's copter or something like that. But anyway, 3 and a white for a 3/1 flying human pilot. It is an uncommon, and your vehicles you control have flying. So the vehicles fly no matter what. Turn them into creatures. They're flying trains. They're flying copters. They're flying, I don't know what else. Flying demolition stoppers, right? This is great because crew 3 is enough to crew almost all of the vehicles, or at least a lot of the really, really strong ones that you want to be playing anyway. So he does his job there as a pilot. And then he himself is a 3/1 flyer for 4, which is decent. Not too far off from Propeller Pioneer, which is the 2/1 4-mana Fabricate 1 flyer. A Cloud Mantis is fine, and dinging the toughness down to a 3/1 instead of a 3/2 is, dangerous, because 1 toughness creatures can often be a liability is what I mean. And but I think the upsides here, like just being able to crew a vehicle and then also make it fly, is pretty insane. So think about that, like Renegade Freighter, as strong as it is, or I don't know, Cultivator's Caravan, something like that. Think about them with flying. Pretty crazy, right? Winding Constrictor, black and green, for a 2/3 uncommon snake. If 1 or more counters would be placed on an artifact or creature you control, that many of those counters plus 1 are placed on that permanent instead. The same goes for you. If you would get counters, you get 1 plus the amount of counters you would have gotten. So essentially, if you get energy counters, you get an additional energy counter. If one of your artifacts or creatures gets a type of counter, whether it's a 1/1 counter or some other special kind of counter, like a charge counter, if there's anything like that, they get an additional 1. So it's like a Hardened Scales type effect. It does work with +1/+1 counters, but it works with any type of counter. In other formats, it backfires with poison counters, but it also works with experience counters, which is pretty nice. So really sweet little card. The stats are nice too. A 2/3 for 2, which we've seen a lot of in Kaladesh, is a good starting rate. And keep in mind, black-green does have that 1/1 counter theme going for it. So this is the type of card you're actively looking for. The type of card that might cue you in Aether Revolt that black-green might be an open archetype, or the +1 counter theme might be an open archetype. Not to mention, like, just curving this into something like Thriving Rhino is pretty insane. Anytime the Rhino attacks and uses its ability, those Thrive and Cycle cards, they get 2 counters. So this is really, really strong, and I like it quite a bit. I don't know, Hunt the Weak, like, gives you 2 counters. Lots of cool stuff there. All right, I've alluded to this card already. Siege Modification. This is build-aroundy type auras here. 1 and double red for a uncommon aura. Enchant creature or vehicle. Pretty important there. Enchant creature or vehicle. As long as the enchanted permanent is a vehicle, it's a creature in addition to its other types. The enchanted creature gets +3/+0 and has first strike. So you can use this on a creature, which saves it from being kind of a build-around type card. You can put this aura on a creature, give it +3/+0 and first strike, and let it go to town. A +3/+0, I don't know, even if you put this on like a 2/2, that creature's going to get in there. It's going to be extremely hard to kill it. Yes, you're opening yourself up for a 2-for-1, but you want to be aggressive. You want to get in there often, and you want to deal a lot of damage. And this gives you the boost to do it. The real intriguing part here is that part about making a vehicle a creature. So it circumvents, again, it circumvents the crew cost. You no longer have to crew that vehicle if it's already a creature due to siege modification. Now, you're opening yourself up for a big 2-for-1 if you do this, and your opponent just naturalizes your vehicle or kills your creature. But the upside is really here. I mean, look at the vehicles. Look at the 1-mana 7/11. It's gonna happen. They're both uncommons, right? It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen at your pre-release. Somebody's gonna turn 1 that thing. Somebody's gonna turn 3 this card. They're gonna smash with a 10/11 on turn 3. It's gonna happen, right? But it does require you to keep those deck constrictions in mind. So when you're drafting this card, this is the type of card that looks shiny. You're like, wow, maybe I'll pick this up. But you got to be careful, right? Got to not open yourself up for 2-for-1s too often. But just play this when your opponent's tapped out and smash them for 10 on turn 3. And record it and send it to me. I'd love to see it. Speaking of vehicles, more trains. Lots of trains on Kaladesh. Untethered Express is 4 mana for a 4/4 uncommon vehicle with trample, because trains have to have trample, I guess. Whenever it attacks, put a 1/1 counter on it, crew 1. Now, a lot of people saw this today and they're like, well, it's not as good as Freighter because it costs 4. All right, first off, it costs 1 more than Freighter. Second off, the crew cost is less. And third off, it still attacks as a 5/5 rather than a 5/3, and it has 4 toughness, which is crucial in this set. It dodges, cards like Essence Extraction. It dodges a unpowered up Weldon Sparks, which is very important. It dodges Impeccable Strike, or Impeccable Timing, or whatever the white card's called, which is kind of the downfall of the Freighter, is that as good as the Freighter is, and yes, it is an extremely good common, which is another notable difference between the cards, Freighter does have that 3 toughness that kind of leaves it in limbo against certain other cards. Not to say Freighter's bad because of that, but it is a little more vulnerable, whereas this thing is going to attack as a 5/5 the turn you play it. It's going to require you to tap any creature at all. It could be a servo token. Freighter's easy to crew at crew 2, but I think the cards are very similar. I do think this one is better. That's just my opinion, and I think this card is just super powerful, right? If your opponent can't deal with it right away, like, when are they going to be able to deal with it? It gets out of control very quickly. A 5/5, a 6/6, 7/7, like, it's going to spiral out of control, and that trample makes it an even bigger threat. So I like this one a lot. I love the art on it. I think the card's cool. And yes, I do think it's better than Renegade Freighter, but not by that much, considering Freighter is a common. All right, Free Gem Region is the last card I've seen. These other 3 up here, I have not seen those cards yet, so those will be kind of a blind review. And we're almost at the end of the video. Thanks again for watching. Free Gem Region, am I saying that right? 4 and double red for a dragon. Here's your generic Kaladesh dragon. Let's go. Improvise, so you can tap artifacts to make it cost 1 less for each artifact you tap when you cast it. It has flying, and it has 1 in a red, gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So this can cost as little as 2, potentially on like turn 3 or 4, or potentially on turn 4 or something like that if you get like completely busted artifact draw. And then it has like super fire breathing, essentially fire breathing, but it requires you to do it in 2s, which is interesting. It's interesting whether or not I think this card is better or worse than Skyship Stalker. I think Skyship Stalker's biggest thing is that you can give it haste, and the first strike is very relevant in combat. This thing does seem like it will end a game, though, and even if you play this on turn 5, like, you tap 1 artifact, like, consider that like a worst-case scenario improvise. A 5-mana 4/4 flyer is already fine, and then the fact that it can attack as like an 8-power flyer the very next turn is pretty crazy. So this is strong, and let's just go with complete worst case scenario. 6-mana 4/4 flyer that can attack as a 10-power creature on the following turn in the air. You better deal with that right away, or you're dead in 2 turns. So I do like this card. I think it's actually quite powerful. So I'm not knocking it because of its generic. It is a very generic card. Dragons usually tend to be, but it is a very powerful generic card. Don't let dragons fool you. There's my Facebook again, guys. Sorry, I keep clicking back and it's counted as double click, but very unprofessional. Very unprofessional. All right, again, these next 3 cards I haven't seen yet. I feel a sneeze coming on, so bless you, Tim. Thank you, sir. Pacification Array. 1 mana for an uncommon artifact. 2 mana to tap target artifact or creature. So, okay, it's like a not amazing tapper, but an okay tapper in the format of an artifact. And it has no restrictions on what you can tap as far as creatures go. Like, it's not tap target creature with power, blah, 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 or anything like that. So, I think this is good. I'm just looking at it for the first time, but this seems like the type of card if you want to be very controlling, it's pretty nice. And keep in mind, tappers like this, first off, the initial investment's not very high. 1 mana to just start on the battlefield is great. Second off, you can use it to improvise if you're not using it to tap things, because you can tap any artifacts for improvise. And third, this type of card, tappers in general, they scale in power level as the game goes on because they're now tapping down better and better creatures. For instance, if your opponent plays a 3/3, you're going to be tapping that down with this, and then they follow up by playing a 5/5 or something like that. You're now tapping a 5/5, and you didn't have to invest anything different here. So your card, it doesn't feel like it, but your card got a little bit more powerful because it's dealing with a more powerful creature. But interesting card here. I think it is playable. It's not just chaff like this type of card usually is when it comes in the form of an artifact, but it's cheap enough that it seems like a good limited playable card. And then it looks like we've got 2 more here, and we're done for the day. This is a really interesting looking one here. Again, I'm going for translations off of Mythic Spoiler, so if something's a little bit off here, that's just the person who translated it. We'll know when it's in English. Well, that's a 1-mana artifacts. All right. Merchant's Porter looks like a rare. It is a construct. Costs 1 mana, and it has activated ability. It's a 1/2 for 1. 3 and a blue. Tap X number of artifacts you control. Look at the top X cards of your library. Add 1 of them to your hand, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So, tap X number of artifacts you control. Okay, so this does one of 2 things. Either this is completely correct, and what it does is you pay 3 and a blue, and you tap any number of artifacts, and you get to look at the same number of cards off the top and put one of those cards in your hand, or it just counts the number of artifacts you control, and I'm not entirely sure. It looks like the first thing I said. You can tap a bunch of artifacts and tap this to just look at a bunch of cards and put one of them into your hand. So pretty sweet. This comes down, again, this isn't like insanely powerful, but it is really good card filtering. And the nice thing here is that the investment, again, is really low. You're just paying 1 mana, and you're getting a 1/2 out of it. So if you have to attack a couple times and do whatever, or you have to use this to improvise before you're really using its own ability, that's pretty cool too. I like it. I don't think it's insanely powerful. It asks you to do a lot for that sort of effect. Like, how many artifacts are you tapping on your own turn? Or I guess you can use this at the end of your opponent's turn. So I don't know. I'll have to see it in action. But interesting nonetheless. And then final, Ornithopter. Oh, it looked like a white card. This is just Ornithopter. Awesome. So we get a new Ornithopter. Pretty cool. Not much to say about Ornithopter. It is the type of card that you'd play if you need artifact synergies, but on its own, it's not particularly impressive or anything like that. Really nice for improvise, I guess. Really nice for anything that has, a need for more artifacts, but it's an uncommon too. Is it so busted it needs to be uncommon? I don't know. Paradoxical Outcome is still in limited, so maybe it works with that, or I don't know, Aetherflux Reservoir. I don't know, whatever. It's Ornithopter, right? With new art. So super cool reprint there. I probably should have looked at it a little more closely. Could have guessed it was Ornithopter, but anyway, that's it for today. That was a bunch of cards to look through. Again, I'm not going through all the masterpieces, but check them out because they're awesome. And let me know what you think of these cards. If you're still sitting here watching, listening to me look at 20, 25 different cards, tell me what you think of them and what cards you think are standing out for limited. Keep in mind the intentions of looking at these are for limited purposes. So love to hear what you think. Thanks for hanging out with me. I will be doing this again tomorrow probably, and I'm expecting a pretty big batch for the next couple days, so these videos will be a little bit long. So again, if you're watching, I really appreciate it, taking the time out of your day to watch this video. Anyway, my name is Timothy. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.